how I got into this whole mess, actually. When I was a CPS worker, I was investigating child abuse with a degree in history. I had a fair amount of human services experience, but I said to my boss, I need to know more about how to interview kids, primarily about child sexual abuse. So she sent me to a training in Great Falls in 1995. And the first part of this is all based on that woman's work, and her name is Dr. Ann Graffel. She's a sociolinguist, which means she's extraordinarily smart. She has a PhD in sociolinguistics, because linguistics is an extremely complex field. She was a court reporter, and she got really tired of watching attorneys just butcher interviews and interrogations and cross-exams of kids, and so she decided to go back to graduate school and research communicating with children. And to this day, she is a pillar of that research movement, and there is a ton of research on talking with children now. So this, in general, applies to talking with children ages 2 to 10. Once again, we're going to talk about assumptions. The assumptions that an adult may bring into a conversation with a child that we don't even know we're bringing in. How kids use language and how that's different than how we use language, and then conceptual development, because a lot of times people will think young children actually understand concepts because they have words that represent concepts, but they don't understand the concept behind the words. It can make a big difference in an investigation. I'm going to skip that. So the first thing you have to do when you're going to talk to kids, if you haven't done it in a while, is try to remember being one. Because we all should be experts. Well, shouldn't we? We were all kids. People talk to us. We should get the flip side. Remember when you were maybe elementary school, really you didn't have a lot of control over your day. You may have picked out your own clothes, but how you got to school, what you had for lunch, how you got home from school, what you did after school, what you had dinner, when you had dinner, what you did on weekends, what you did in the summer, were all decisions rightfully made by an adult person somewhere in your world to keep you safe and healthy and help you grow. And another thing to think about is we all have got adult perspective now because we all have adult years of experience. Because you talked about that. When you gain experience, then one, you know more, but two, you may be able to learn more because you can draw on that experience you already have and apply it to the learning that's in front of you now. 5-year-old has 5 years of experience to draw on. 6-year-old has 6 years of experience. They only know what they've already experienced, and that's it. And so you're right, you learn more when you get older because you have more to apply to it. And then time frames. Time is very different when you're a kid. I mean, remember how long school days were and how short summers were? Remember how long it took for Christmas to get here? But not so much the day you had to go get your shots. You know, so just think about those things. When you talk to a child, even if you think they know why you're there, explain to them the framework for why you're there. Who you are, what your job is, and why you're talking to them. And you may need to do that more than one time, depending on the age of the child. Make it in the simplest possible terms, depending on the age of the child. So I would say to a kid when I showed up at their school one day to talk to them about a report of abuse, a young elementary school child, I would say, I have an office in Helena, downtown. I have a phone on my desk. Sometimes my phone rings and people are worried about kids. Today my phone rang and somebody was worried about you, so I came to talk to you to see if you're okay. Really simple. And kind of make that graduated in complexity. I mean, then you'll get, if you have teenagers in our system, they'll already know more about what your job's supposed to be than you do, and they'll just tell you. But
well, they'd be right.
yeah, I know. That's the thing. And then, you know, why are you talking to them and how did you get there? Did a judge tell you to be there? Some way to tell them why and how you're there. We may not think very much about what a question might mean to a child. There's actually, linguistically, 5 different types of questions. And a lot of kids in the Child Protective Services system, especially the ones that are going to get a CASA because someone's already taken custody of them, may have had very bad experiences being questioned. So in general, there's new information. questions, giving people directions. Would you open the door? Would you load the dishwasher? Suggestions. Should we go swimming? Should we go to a movie? Those are all questions. Tests for knowledge. And then there's accusations. And a lot of our kids in Child and Family Services have experienced questions in the form of accusations. How could you be so stupid? Did you know how dumb you are? Did you know I don't even love you? All questions. So being questioned. Did you know I wish you'd never been born? How come you're even here? Those, I mean, so questions can be scary and really unpleasant for kids. So you have to be careful. The first thing you have to do is learn how to hear yourself when you're talking to a child, and this takes a fair amount of practice. I used to videotape myself when I was trying to learn how to do this, and I'd watch the videotapes and go, oh. I'd actually interviewed a kid today and heard myself say something and went, yeah. You know, so you have to listen to your own words as they're coming out of your mouth in order to successfully talk with a child. How did you choose your words? There's a lot of linguistic things. Tagging 2 or 3 words onto the front of a sentence or the end of a sentence can change the entire meaning of the question for the child, or the entire meaning of your statement. If you say to a child, can you remember what happened with Dad? And they're young enough, the question they're going to hear is, can you remember? And then they're going to say no, because they didn't hear and they're not responding to the what happened with Dad part. If you're talking to, in an the kinds of forensic interviews that I do now, I never say, can you remember, ever. I've eliminated that. I just say, what happened with Dad? Mm-hmm. Tell me all about it. Because can you remember is a separate question. So they'll say no, and they're not answering your question. How'd you put the words together? And if the child's response isn't what you think you asked, then probably it was you asking something that came across completely differently to the child. And so go back, and if you get a funny response or they look at your answer doesn't match the question, say, I don't think I said that very well. I'm going to try that again. Kids love to hear that you need help, that you're old, and you can't remember things very well. The little guy I talked to today was 8, and he said, do you forget things? And I said, I do. I'm sorry, I'm old. And he said, I'll help you. I said, thank you. So, but instead of focusing on the child's response, you need to put an equal or more amount of focus on what you said first. Because the puzzle may actually be in there somewhere. The child may be actually answering very appropriately what they thought they heard. So listen to yourself. Developmental levels. Preschoolers can't shift perspectives. So what this means in my work is a preschooler, if I show them a drawing, an anatomically correct drawing, they're trying to figure out what happened to their body. Representational shift means they would understand what was in that drawing. I was asking about what happened to their body. Can't do it. Developmentally not there. Representational shift should be there by 6, sometimes by 5, rarely by 4, never at 3. 3-year-olds will invariably point at their own bodies about what happened, and oftentimes take their clothes off and do other things in interviews that are a little hard to manage. Abstraction, they can't think conceptually. Time is abstract, numbers are abstract, kinship relationships are abstract. They may have the words. If you have number words and can count to 1 to 10, then you know the words, but you don't know the numerical concepts behind them. Time is critically important in investigations like we have with our CASA kids, because law enforcement in particular, but often CPS also, is going to need to find out when and where that happened and perhaps how many times. And it's a very unfair question to a child because they can't answer it. And the minute they try, because they're trained to give an adult an answer, so they will give you an answer, they will discredit themselves immediately. So one of my favorite stories, about 2 years ago, we had a new law enforcement guy on our multidisciplinary team in Helena that responds to child sexual abuse. He was at his first interview, We do forensic interviews at the Child Advocacy Center here in Helena, which I very thankfully handed off to a new director on June 1st because I had too many jobs. And not because I was in poverty, I just couldn't say no. So the guy came to his first interview, and law enforcement's trained very differently about interviews than CPS is. So we had a 5-year-old little boy, and he's in there with his interviewer. I think it was Marcy, whom you've met, and she's on our team. And the officer kept saying, she has to ask him how many times. And the goal at our CAC is the child meets one trained forensic interviewer, but the other investigators watch over a closed circuit system. So if the questions they need get answered, because the interviewer will come out and collect questions from them. Marcy came out and he said, need to ask him how many times. And Marcy said, no, I'm not going to ask a 5-year-old how many times. It's really not okay. And this guy was new and very insistent. She came out again and he's like, nothing else matters if he can't say how many times. And I said to him, Tim, or actually it was Tori, and he knows I tell this story. I said, Tori, if she asks him how many times, he's going to answer. And he's going to say some unbelievable, fantastical number or something highly inaccurate. And he didn't believe me. Yeah, he said, okay, so Marcy, just ask him. So she said, okay. So she goes back there and she says, how many times did that touching happen with whoever? And the kid looked at her. I could have kissed him, and he said, a gajillion billion. And Tori's jaw hit the table, and he looked at me and he said, how did you know he was going to do that? And I was like, well, no, they don't all make me look that good, but child development, that's what that was. They cannot do it, but they will try to answer, and then in court, they're horribly discredited. So everything we do when we talk to kids at the CAC and we do forensic interviews is designed to support the credibility of that child. Never to put them in a position developmentally where they can't answer and it's going to discredit what happened to them. The other thing is really little kids don't know that a question and an answer go together. So you may have to actually tell a really little kid or model for them what a question answer means, particularly in highly chaotic, disorganized families. They may never, kids learn communication by watching what goes on around them, so if no one sits and talks with them or asks them questions that are appropriate and asked in a nice way, and all of the questions are things like, why in the hell did you do that? They aren't going to, really, how do you answer that if you're a kid? It's paradoxical, right? You can either try to explain why you just hit your brother, and then you're going to get in worse trouble, or you just don't try to explain, but questions don't need answers. And then between 3 and 6, and in the population of kids that we work with up to 7 and 8, real and pretend may mingle in their answers. And the thing about that is there's a developmental stage, usually starting around 4, where children do fantastical imaginary play, and they often will mingle fantastical statements in with what's really going on right then. Really important developmental stage. They need to have their brains be able to do that in order to move to the next development, but it can also make them sound like liars if you don't know how to sort that out. So if the kid says something to you that you think isn't realistic, say, did that really happen, or is that something that didn't really happen? Just ask them. Is that something that you saw, that you really saw happen, or just something that you thought about? There's a bunch of different ways to ask. The other thing about little guys is they are unable to think about they aren't thinking. They do not know what they do not know, and they can't tell you. So they can't think about what they don't know, because they don't know it. Really, I mean, so an adult, you can interview an adult or an older child and think, they were anticipating the question, crafting the answers. Preschoolers, no chance. I love interviewing them. They cannot possibly describe anything they have not experienced, seen, or heard. Can't do it. Mm-hmm. They also might not tell you anything, or you may not be able to understand them. So they are fun to interview, but time and numbers. Yesterday is gone, just like last Christmas is gone. And tomorrow hasn't happened yet, so it's a complete unknown. So time frames with kids are really, really hard. There was and the research on it is changing. It's very dynamic. It changes all the time. It used to be that if you had to do a time frame with a kid, you'd try to get, so was that before Christmas vacation or after Christmas vacation? Was that whatever holiday was near? Right now we'd be talking to them about Halloween. Or was that before school started or after? Some newer research is coming out. It's not all the way out yet, but I've seen it presented at a couple conferences that even asking that kind of broad, trying to narrow it down question is doing children a tremendous disservice. Counting skills are not number skills. Taller is older. If the other kid is taller, then they were older.
I didn't get
Shorter
that.
is younger. Huh?
I didn't get counting skills are not number skills.
Oh, counting skills are, so that one, so counting skills, knowing how to count to 10 doesn't mean that they can tell you if they were molested 10 times.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so the question we ask for young children in an interview is, did that happen one time or did that happen more than one time? And that they can answer. Sometimes we'll have them demonstrate with markers where we'll say, here's some markers, pick up one marker, now pick up a bunch of markers. And then we'll say, did that happen one time or a bunch of times? But we won't assign a number to it because it's just meaningless. And it's very hard to get attorneys and judges to understand that, and juries, terribly hard to get juries to understand that. It's just meaningless. Teenagers are grown-ups to little kids. So they may have had a perpetrator that was an older teenager, but they may describe that kid as a grown-up. Surprisingly, children under 10 have not necessarily mastered kinship concepts. So when they start using kinship words, aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, sister, and in this day and age where there may be multiple step brothers, sisters, half-brothers and sisters, you need to use another source to verify those kinship relationships because the kids may or may not be accurate in them, if that's important in the case. Questions about a familial relationship in an interview may actually add confusion and make the child look less credible. So I interviewed a little boy once who in the course of the interview I figured out had 4 grandmas. But we thought the abusive incident had happened at one of his grandma's house, and I didn't know that he had 4 grandmas that he saw regularly. And so by the time I realized that he was talking about different grandmas in different houses, we were in deep trouble in that interview. And he had been offended, but the way the interview was panning out was making him look horribly discredible because no one on the team had said, by the way, he's got 4 different people he calls grandma, 4 different houses, and he sees them all really often. And you're going to have to sort through that. I was able to go back and we got names for the grandmas and house colors for the grandmas, and it can add a lot of confusion to a conversation that usually can be pulled out of records, so you don't need to put the child through trying to describe that. Cultural considerations are very important with kinship and family, and you need to pay a lot of attention to that. This is really interesting. The use of a negative word in a question reduces the accuracy of the answer by 50%. Isn't that interesting? So if you use a negative, and there are 3 different kinds of negatives, syntactic, semantic, and morphological, you are reducing the odds that that child can give you an accurate answer. So you can do a negative that's like tacking an un to the front of a word, so a prefix like unhappy. If you say, did you feel unhappy? They don't have any idea whether yes or no is going to mean that they were happy or unhappy. It's going to confuse them. Deny is a negative word. Deny is considered negative. And if you tack a negative onto the end of a word, the same thing. It confuses the kids completely, because those are conceptual. Right along with the no, none, don't, didn't, hasn't, wouldn't. All of those. So you try, a good forensic interviewer will never use any kind of a negative word the whole time they talk to a kid. Propositions or concepts. Spatial relations, where an object is in relation to another is what prepositions are for. In, on, next to, under, behind, in front of, which is that. So if you have to determine how a child was in relation to something else in their environment in an abusive incident, and you need the child to describe you have to test that they actually are using the preposition the same way you are. They will use them, they may misuse them. That won't undermine their credibility if in the interview you can demonstrate what the child meant by the use of that word, and then you could explain that developmentally they didn't know their prepositions yet. Pronouns, any pronoun use, just eliminate it. You don't start it, it's like, so your dad, he told you. you'd say, so your dad told you. You'd never refer back to the proper noun with the pronoun later in the sentence with a young child, because they will switch people on you. You will no longer be talking about the he that you thought referred back to dad. Now you're talking about dad, Uncle Jerry, over here, and you're like, what? Hold, wait. And just went, oh, and then you have to backtrack and get that all sorted out. And then Dr. Graham or Dr. Walker has a list of words she called pointer words. This, that, here, there, it. Just get rid of them if you can. But only if you have to talk to kids in a really significant way about getting evidence. Because if you can just gain awareness of how you're putting your sentences together, it'll help a lot. It takes a long time to learn how to eliminate all of these very common phrases from your language. It takes a really long time. And a lot of videos. Meanings, true meanings, parties, especially when you're at court. Like if you have kids, it's rare in a dependent neglect case that a child goes to court, but it's not unheard of. So if you are helping prep a kid for court, there are so many words associated with court that have two meanings for them. Even case, they might be thinking something completely different. You say court, they might be thinking basketball. Hearing, strike, swearing. We actually had a little girl. I'd never seen it happen. I'd read it in the literature, but I'd never seen it happen until we had a trial recently with the victim was a 5-year-old, and she had to come in and try to testify. And they tried to swear her in, and the minute they said swearing, she said, I am not allowed to swear. And I had read tons of case studies and researches of that happening, but I was like, yeah, right, but she was just, I mean, it was like, sometimes I see this stuff happen in real life that's in the books, and I go, oh, and like, nailed it, she nailed it. And Tara was looking at us, no, this is not good. Like, yeah, but she's right where the research said she should be. So anyway, so just think about all of our adult lingo. And if you have to help a kid, even if you're talking with them about court, pay a lot of attention.
Dana, would you talk for a second about if in the course of the CASA, speaking with a child, they want to start talking about, say, a sexual incident that hasn't come to light in any other circumstance yet.
Yeah. Sometimes our kids who get into care and start to feel safer will disclose. Disclosing abuse is a process, not an event. So a kid doesn't just spill everything all at once. So as a child's in care and begins to feel safer and more secure, you might be the person with them the day that they decide to say what else happened. And there's some really simple things to do. If they start to tell you something more different, then you know it's not in the file. You've never seen it before. Listen without interrupting, because you're immediately going to want to, it's going to be, your heart and your gut are going to want to respond. Listen quietly without interrupting until they're done talking. And then say, I'm really glad you told me about that. That's really an important thing. I'll make sure that someone finds out who can help with that. Do not question them. And I know that sounds really easy when I say it right now. It's going to be excruciatingly difficult not to ask them any questions. The reason for that is the more times a kid is asked questions, the less credibility they're going to have when we get to court. And if you ask a kid questions enough times, they will decide that they're saying it wrong, and they'll change what they're saying, which is immediately interpreted as a lie, discredits everything that came before, just so everybody will stop asking them questions. They'll just change their answer to get us off their back. So listen. Tell them you're really glad that they told you, that you believe them. That's really important. And that you will tell somebody who can help. If they say they don't want you to tell, then you're going to have to say, I'm sorry, honey, but that's really important. And someone besides me needs to know, too. And then, as soon as you can, without making the kid feel weird about it, write down everything you remember and document it. Where you were, what they said, what you think maybe triggered the disclosure, and then report it to the social worker right away. So, but yeah, don't question them.
And can I ask you another thing, because a tendency of, say, a mom would be to start, you know, and I would think it would be best not to show that kind of emotional reaction.
If you cannot have a visible emotional reaction, just stay really calm and peaceful. That's probably very best.
Mm-hmm.
Because they will be, one of the things we know a lot about with kids' disclosures is they will often do tentative disclosures before they will spill all the beans, because they're going to test the reaction of the adults in their worlds. If they get adverse reactions or reactions that are hard for them, which could be, oh, I'm so sorry, and giving them a hug could make them actually feel worse instead of better. Yeah. And you also don't ever want to physically touch a kid without invitation who may have been sexually abused, ever, because you have no idea how their perpetrator groomed them. You know, that putting your arm around the shoulders might be how it all started. You just don't want to go there. But it's really important to just be calm, accepting, and do the, oh my God, later with somebody else. Yeah.
A lot of that, like you said, the touching on the shoulder and stuff, you find a lot of that with teens?
You know, it really just depends. It's very hard to predict. It's really entirely hard to predict from case to case what kind of touching a child might associate with their offender. I can guarantee you that really sophisticated offenders have used all kinds of appropriate touching before they have been inappropriate. So then, just a few things on memory, because memory research is also really interesting but very complicated. There's a couple kind of, so anytime you ask someone a question, you're requiring them to go into their brain and pull information out, adults and kids. There's a couple kinds of broad types of memory: recognition memory and retrieval memory. Recognition memory, babies, they know their mom's voices, they know their mom's smells. They can't talk, but they recognize their moms. It's at birth, present at birth. Recognition memory requires a cue, and sometimes we know we're talking to a child and we need to give them a cue without leading them, and there's a number of ways to do that. Retrieval memory is a very conscious process. So you ask a child to remember something, they have to go into their memory, remember where they were, what was happening. More complex, they have to go through a series of steps. Suggestibility is the huge question in child interviewing. Every good defense attorney is going to come into court with a suggestibility defense. They're going to say, someone told this kid what to say, someone made this kid believe it happened, when it really didn't. So there's a lot of training and art that goes into talking with kids that help us defend against the suggestibility defense. And I won't go through the research with you now, but overall, by age 10, most kids in the United States are no more suggestible than you or I are. So if someone said to me, Dana, you were raped yesterday in the parking lot at work, I'd say, no, I wasn't. And any 10-year-old in the country should be able to say that, unless they have some developmental challenges or disabilities. A kid under 10, and usually well under 10, is suggestible. Young children are suggestible. They can be fed information. There's a lot of research on how kids are effectively fed information, and that's what these studies are, and how that happens. So you do have to be a lot more careful when you talk to younger kids. However, really young kids can't tell you something they don't know, hasn't happened, they haven't seen or heard. So they can't make it up. They don't know what sex is. They can't just generate an accurate description of sex. If they're 4, they've either seen it on a movie, heard it, or had it happen to them. So there's a lot of things we do. The most important thing, which is source monitoring, and that's how we find out from a child, well, how did you know that? You know, Daddy touched my pee-pee. Well, how did you know that happened? Well, because I felt it. Because I saw it. Did someone tell you what to say before you came to see me? Did someone tell you what to say when you came to talk to me today? Yeah, my mom did. Did you see that happen with your own eyes? Did you hear it with your own ears? Did you feel it with your own body? Did you hear that? Did someone tell you? Did you feel it? Yeah, those are all on there. So we do a lot of source monitoring when we talk with kids about what's happened to them, and then when we get on the stand, we can demonstrate. This is called source monitoring. It was very purposeful. Here was what I was checking for.
As counsel, we wouldn't be doing these types of
You aren't
interviews.
going to do those, but you are going to potentially be the one that's going to hear the next disclosure. Assumptions will contaminate investigations, absolutely. They will rob children of their voice to tell what happened in their own words, which to me at this point in my career may be more important than anything else, because the child has a better chance of recovering emotionally from sexual trauma if they get a chance to tell their story. Even if all the rest of us disappear, if they get a chance to tell their story and someone who loves them believes them, they will probably be okay, even if all the rest of us are gone. But if they don't ever get to say what really happened and no one believes them, they're in deep trouble. And the other thing assumptions do is it protects perpetrators. Perpetrators know kids don't have credibility. They bank on it. And they bank on us not knowing this stuff and not hanging in there to figure it out and support the kids' credibility. So that's why we do this work. And that is the Child Advocacy Center contact information, where I am no longer director. Paula Sams is there now. But I brought you my cards, my state card. If any of you have a case and you have questions, Bill's an amazing resource. And I'll be right with you every step of the way. But if you guys have questions, concerns, want to run a scenario by me, just call me, tell me you're at CASA, and I'm happy to listen and help. And then I like to close, even though I know you guys have had a really long day. It's important that you know how much I appreciate your willingness to do this work for kids. And also that it is sometimes difficult work, and you're probably going to upset people if you're doing your work correctly and make them mad at you. And so if you're sitting in the family group decision-making meeting or in a meeting and you're the one saying, well, but, you know, from Heather's perspective, she's 6. What if we didn't have to have her on 3 buses to get to school? What if, could we do something? And all the professionals look at you and go, no. You're not the issue. And you'd be like, well, but actually for her every day, twice a day, that actually really does matter. So, and they go, you know, they're going to look at you like you're nuts. Because they're tired. They have unbelievable complexity in their cases. They have more than one Heather in their caseload. And they can move the big rocks as best they can. But tending to what every child needs to feel respected and safe in every case really is above and beyond what they can do. And that really is your job. And so if they look at you funny and they start to get irritated, you're doing a good job. So, yeah, and that'll be good. And then I'll hear about you guys when I go to child protection team. Everybody will say, oh, it's CASA's. And then they look at Bill and then they all just get quiet.
So can you insist and get that?
Sometimes,
As an
sometimes not.
example.
You may not.
So when do you know when to shut up?
Well, depending on the issue, maybe you just don't shut up.
Okay.
Maybe you go at it a bunch of different ways. Maybe you talk. Maybe you recognize it isn't that this worker really doesn't want to do that. Because no one in that job gets up every day and wants to do anything worse for a kid. They go into every day trying to do their very, very best with inadequate resources and numbers too high. And maybe they aren't the one that can move that piece of the case, but maybe there's another resource you can find or help find. Maybe it's the parent that you're working with who's trying to get the kid back, who could help you figure out how could we have Heather's day go a little better. Okay. You know, so maybe you just say it enough times that you say, you guys, I know you've heard this a million times, but this, 3 buses and an hour and a half at the beginning and the end every day is really not going very well for her. It's like, so maybe she is safe, but this is so yeah. But thank you so much for doing the work you do. It really does make a difference, and those of us who like kids really appreciate it.